Hello and welcome to week 6 part 2. Today we're going to work on our paragraph development, and then we're going to move on to part 3, which will be a separate video again, and it will also be embedded in your PowerPoint. I hope that the embedding of the videos is working okay. I haven't heard anyone say that they're having problems, so anyways, best of luck. So we're going to work on paragraph development today. So what this means is basically simple ways, simple tips, really simple ways to help develop your paragraphs and make them that much better. So what I want to do is I'm starting now on slide 10. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with something perhaps a little bit unusual, but it's what not to do, what not to use. So I'm finding that with a lot of students, they are perhaps not familiar with what is used in academic English. So academic English basically means that anything above high school level. Academic English tends to focus on the types of language that we use at university level and above. So this is what your interviewers, and this is what when people are looking to hire you as future teachers, they're looking for this type of language in both Korean and English. So our focus, or part of our focus for this semester, is to start thinking about these things and to learn some basic skills and some basic points of academic English. So I want to start here with, now, because we're starting with paragraphs are quite short, so, and especially we're only using 10 sentences. So the first thing I want to start with is comma and so on. Now, the reason why I'm recommending that you don't use this is this is usually used for when you have a long paper, or when you're talking about a variety of items which have an extensive list, a very long list. So because we're only writing 10 sentences, you have no need to use and so on. And the purpose of and so on is basically to show that it continues for ever and ever and ever, or for a very long time at any rate. So usually when I read students, or when I hear students say and so on, you should definitely not use it when you're speaking. And remember, that's part of our reason for focusing on writing, is to try to train your skills in English so that you focus on good skills and hopefully get rid of some perhaps bad habits, or habits that are confusing for people who listen to you or read what you're writing. So anyways, don't use and so on. What I'd recommend to do instead is make a short list. So what we're going to do later is we're going to learn how to make a short list of 3 items. So basically 3 items or 4 items of specific details are much better and much more effective than saying and so on. And so on is a very general term. It doesn't give any specific information, so you are much better to give specific information. The second one has the same point. This is etc., which means it has the same idea as and so on. So it, again, is unnecessary for you to use in short writing. So for example, if you're using, perhaps I would say etc., if you write a paper of maybe 10 pages or more, then etc. I think would be acceptable. Otherwise, just stay away from it. You're better off to write a list of 3 or 4 than you are to write etc. The third thing I want to recommend that you stay away from, that you do not use when you're writing, is contractions. Contractions, basically, let's think about it like winter time. Winter is coming. Oh no, oh no. So how do you feel when it's a cold, snowy winter's day and you wear your t-shirt and you go outside? Right away, you go from relaxed to... So this is what contract means. Contract means to get smaller, in this case, in the way I'm using it. And what we're doing here in English, contractions define words when we take two words and we put them together with an apostrophe usually. So for example, I'm, she'll, don't. These are really, really common, but contractions traditionally are used for speaking because speaking is much faster. So contractions used in speaking are they're just simpler, they're just easier to use. But when we're writing, we want to show how skillful we are with the English language. So we want to show that we can spell the words and that we know what the two words are that make up the contraction. So instead of writing I'm, you should write I am. Instead of writing she'll, you should write she will. And of course, instead of writing don't, you should write do not. Unless you are writing a dialogue, unless there are two people speaking together and you're writing down what they're saying, because you're writing what someone is saying. So, for examples, I've given you here, I don't know about this magazine. Spoken, no problem. But in writing, I recommend that you write the full form. I do not know much about this magazine as much. It just shows that you have better skill with writing and spelling. And secondly, I've given you, I can't try the recipe is a spoken form fine, but in writing, I'm going to ask you to stay away from that and use I cannot. And notice that it's one word, not two words. I cannot make the recipe. So please don't use these in your writing for our writing practice in classes. So I'm going to move on now to our paragraph development. So in this case now I want to take a look at lists and I want to show you some really basic skills for how to put lists together so that when you're speaking or writing, in both cases, you'll be very clear and it will match so that your fluency improves very naturally. So I've moved on now to slide 13. And in slide 13, what I'd like you to do is try. So you don't need to write this. This is not part of your assignment. What I'd like you to do is, just now, you don't have to write it, but if you write it, it might be helpful for yourself to connect it in your mind, because remember that that's really the point of you studying all of your lessons, is to try to connect these ideas in your memory so that they lock in and you don't forget them. And then hopefully also you can teach these to your students in the future and help them to better their English. So the first thing I'd like you to do is write down 3 things that you like. Now the important idea is that there should be an umbrella concept. So a family that incorporates those 3 things. So for example, 3 fruits. So 3 types of music perhaps, or 3 musical instruments, 3 actors, 3 actresses, 3 movies, 3 colors. You can use animals or foods you could also use as well. Now remember that in English we separate foods and drinks, so you could choose 3 types of foods or 3 types of drinks, but to mix them together would be unusual. So what I've chosen here is a very simple example because my purpose is to show you what my major connections are, my major points are. So the first case I've written is I like apples, bananas, and oranges, 3 types of fruit. So my points here are that, first of all, when we talk about things that we like, we want to say yes, 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 and. So and is inclusive, and it has that general meaning of yes, yes, yes. So I like apples and bananas and oranges, but if we use and every time, then it tends to show that we are separating and that we're going to stop talking about that. It also gets pretty boring. So basically for a list of 3 things, when we list 3 things, we go apples, comma, bananas, comma. And then we use the and to show this is the final point, the final fruit, the final item, and oranges jump. Now, what's going to happen when we have 4 items, because 4 is also acceptable. Over 4 is too much. And remember, we're not going to use and so on. We're not going to use etc. because it's much better and it's much more efficient for you to give details about what you do like than just to say etc. So what happens if we like 4 types of fruit? Apples, bananas, oranges, and kiwis. Oh no, what do? We follow the exact same pattern, but we just move the and to before the last fruit. So basically the and is a little signal and it shows, okay, last one's coming. So we would say, I like apples, comma, bananas, comma, oranges, comma, and kiwis, period. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is negatives, because of course, when we have a negative, what are we going to do? Again, this is both in spoken and written. In this case, I've written it like as if it were spoken, but of course, if you're writing it, it would be much better for you to use the full words. So, I don't like cats, dogs, or chickens. Now, the first thing I'm going to draw your attention to is we have a negative, the "nt." And you can see the "nt," you can hear the "nt." So if there's a not or an "nt" that's part of the sentence, then we're going to use the word "or." And what the "or" signifies with the negative is, I don't want that one, or that one, or that one, or that one. So the idea for this is, I don't like cats. Ew, cats are scary. I don't like dogs. Ew. And I don't like chickens. So I don't like cats, dogs, or chickens has the same listing, but we're choosing to talk about using a negative, okay? So if you notice, we have the same pattern. We have cats, comma, dogs, comma, or chickens. So remember that the negative connects with the or, positive with and. Now, we get into a weird circumstance, however, because what about the word hates? Now, we know the word hates has a negative meaning in our head, but actually, when we look at the word, we cannot see an "nt." We can't see a "not," which means that as it's written, it's a positive word with no negative in it or part of the word. This means that if we use hates, we would use and. So in the same case, if I say, I hate cats, dogs, and chickens, so that would mean we would connect the hates, because it does not have an "nt," it does not have a "not," with and. Now, I would like to make one more point, because I'm not sure if you remember, but something that's kind of a very small point, a very small detail, but a very important detail is when we talk about animals and when we talk about meat. So when we talk about animals, we count them. They're countable nouns. So we talk about, I like cats with the S. I like dogs with the S. And what we're referring to is the animals. I like chickens. Now, if we take away the S and you say, I like cat, I like dog, and I like chicken, the meaning now becomes the meat. So please, please, please be careful. If you do wish to talk about the meat, you can, of course, say, I don't like cat, dog, or chicken. But be careful and realize that, in English, anything that's in any language, actually, a small detail can sometimes have a huge different meaning, or in places, a huge different meaning. So I'm going to move on now to connectors. Now, connectors are very, very useful, especially because the basic principle for connectors is to make 2 sentences 1. So what this is really good for is for you to make your English sentences and Korean sentences, because, we use them a little bit differently in Korean. But in English, they make your sentences longer. So this is a very effective, very simple way to turn 2 simple sentences into 1 long sentence, which makes your English sound much more fluent, and it also makes your English look really good. It sounds really good. So we're going to take a look first. I'm now on slide 15 at connectors themselves. So something that I've noticed that a lot of people do, and in Korean we can do it, and sometimes in English we can do it when you are a famous writer or your job is a writer, then I would accept people that write in this style, but because we're beginners and because we're learning how to practice these things, we're going to stay away from bad habits, and these are very simple bad habits. So the first thing I want to point out is please, please, please do not begin sentences with and, but, or because, okay? Now, did you notice there I used or? Can you figure out why? Good, I'm hoping you got it. So because the first sentences do not start a sentence with and, but, then we put or because we want to say no and, no but, and no because, okay? So the first, I've given you some examples, and these are examples that I see regularly. It's quite normal for me to read your assignments and to see this type of writing. So this is why I want to teach you to stay away from that, because they're not good sentences. So the first one I started with because. So this is because you can't get ingredients here, then. I'm going to explain why in a minute, but I just want to show, generally speaking, sentences that don't work and sentences that do work, and then we'll analyze why. In the second case, I started with and I have and drawing pictures of nature. Now I'm hoping that you're getting the feeling of why it's not a good idea to start with and, okay? In the third case, I've started with but, and I have but I don't like cleaning. Now I'm hoping because I've separated the sentences, you might see more so about why these don't work. Because what I'm noticing is that often students separate two sentences and they begin the second sentence with but actually what they wanted to do was to connect the two sentences. So if you want to connect the two sentences, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Because you have two options, two simple sentences, or use this connector and make one sentence, but a nice long sentence. I've given you some options. These are possible ways to correct this error. So in the first case with because answers why. So you can't get the ingredients here, you cannot get the ingredients here. Why are you talking about that? I cannot make the recipe. Then we have 2 points. So remember the connector has 2 points. So I cannot make the recipe. Why not? Because you can't get the ingredients here. In the second case, I've used and. Now remember, 1, 2, and is the connector. So we put it together. So I like fishing and drawing pictures of nature. There are 2 different points. There are 2 different things that I like to do. And so we use and to connect the 2. In the third case, using but, I like cooking, but I do not like cleaning. So I'm hoping you're starting to get the picture about how these work. So in the first case, the first 3 sentences are wrong because we don't have anything connected to why we're using a connector. And if you don't have it, you can just remove the connector. Anyways, moving on to slide 16. Connect is the idea, okay? So what we want to be focused on is 2 sentences, and we're going to be using these words to connect the 2 sentences together and make one nice long sentence. If you don't want to, that is also fine. Then remove the connector and make 2 simple sentences. That's perfectly fine. It's a higher level and it's more fluent for you to use 2 sentences and connect the 2 sentences into one. So please, please, please connect with and, but, and because, no negative, so we use and, but do not use because, and, or but. Because to start your sentences, because these are supposed to connect 2 sentences. So I've given you some examples here. So what I want to do is I want to start by explaining the ideas behind these words. And in some cases, I think in 2 of the cases anyways, in Korean it's the same. But hajiman in Korean works a little bit differently. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to start with and. So remember, and has 2 points, and is between the 2 points. So we want to say yes and yes. So for example, I like flowers and sunshine. So if we start a sentence with and we say, for example, and it is interesting, right away I'm wondering, what am I missing? What this connected to? So in this case, you can simply correct it by removing the connector. If there's nothing to connect to, what is it? It is interesting. And that's a perfectly good sentence. So don't be afraid of making simple sentences. That's no problem. If you make good simple sentences, they are good. So for example, here I've used League of Legends. So League of Legends is fun and it's interesting. So the meaning is, I think it's fun and I think it's interesting. So if you want to separate it into 2 sentences, League of Legends is fun, period. It is interesting also, or also it is interesting. But if you start with the and, you shouldn't have the period in there. You should remove the period, make the A a small a, and connect the 2 sentences. League of Legends is fun and interesting. Moving on. In the second case, we're moving on to but. So but can be a little bit confusing because it depends on the situation that you're using it in. But essentially what I want to point out is that there's an opposition, okay? So on the one side, we have, but it is very exciting. So immediately it means that something's happened that was the opposite of exciting, or exciting somehow is in opposition to what you were talking about. But we don't know what it is. There is no connection, which means, again, we have 2 choices. We can remove it and say it is very exciting, or we use the connector and take the 2 sentences and put them together. For example, it is fun, comma, but not colorful. So the idea that we're using the but with is you have a positive, it is fun, but, and then we give the negative, but it's not colorful, okay? Or you can say, it's not colorful, comma, but it is fun, okay? So the idea for this is that you're connecting 2 ideas and you're showing the opposition that is a part of your thinking about that. So I've given you, there's a little comic I put in there too. I love you, but I hate your politics. So we've got the love on the one side, the hate on the other. Okay, moving on now. I'm looking at slide 19. So slide 19 is because this is really common, because I think what happens is that in Korean we can do this. We can start with because. But in English it's a little bit different. So the reason why is because answers why in English, and it has to be connected with that. So for example, I've given the sentence because it is fun. We haven't had what is fun explained. So in the bottom half, I've written the 2 parts. Now, there are 2 parts to this, so you can change the parts, okay? So for example, I like League of Legends because it is fun, okay? So why do you like League of Legends? Because it's fun. Now, notice again, if we're connecting the 2, we use a small b and make 1 sentence. If you want to separate, that's also fine, but remove the connector. I like League of Legends, jump, it is fun, jump, period. In the second case, we can do the exact same thing, but we're just going to reverse the order. Because it is fun, I like League of Legends. In this case, you can start with because you've given the explanation. You've explained fully what the fun is connected to. Okay. I'm hoping that that's clear, and I'm hoping this gives you a better understanding of how to use these connectors, and especially about making the decision. So you need to decide if you want to use them as connectors, then it means you're taking 2 sentences and making them 1 sentence. But keep in mind when you're counting your sentences and when you're thinking about your introductions, details, and your conclusions, then you also need to consider that if you've used 2 sentences and made them 1, it is only 1 sentence, which is perfectly fine. If you want to stick to, if you're more comfortable with more sentences, that's perfectly fine. Remove the connector. Moving on, I'm going to continue with our paragraph development. And what I'm going to do here is talk very briefly about some simple ways for you to improve your writing. We've spoken about this briefly before, and some of you are familiar with this already. This is good in any language. So all that we discuss and learn about this semester, I hope, is good for you in English as well as in Korean and in any languages that you study. So what we're going to do next is talk about transition words. And what I want to start with is the discussion of what it means. What is trans? So we can think about maybe transportation, or there are so many varieties of words using the word trans. So can you think about what the word trans means? What the prefix, I guess, means? So if you came up with the idea of to change or to move, then this is exactly right. So essentially transition words are signposts, they're markers, they're sort of lights that tell us, oh, you're changing from detail 1 to detail 2. Ah, you're moving to detail 3. So we can see that this helps people who are reading, and this also helps people who are listening to you, for example, if you're giving a presentation, to follow at what part of the presentation or what part of the paragraph that they're in. So for detail 1, I've given you some transition words here. So I've also given you an idiom. So the idiom I've chosen to take a look at is "the devil is in the details." And what this means is that it's really important for you to pay attention to details. So this it's a twofold meaning. It has two ideas in that one point. In the first point is, don't forget to pay attention to detail 1, detail 2, and detail 3. But furthermore, that you should think about using these transition words, which are good details to use in your paragraph, so that your readers can see, you're moving from detail 1 to detail 2 to detail 3 very, very clearly. So for detail 1, I am going to ask you, please, to stay away from the word first. The reason for this is because in the same way that for many people, many native speakers of English find it very strange that when you ask someone in Korea, how are you, almost everyone responds with the exact same answer. I'm fine, thank you, and you. And the reason why this is strange is because it's robotic. It is so unusual for someone to use English in an identical way to the person beside them. Imagine how it feels when you see or when you speak to 30 people and they all answer an identical answer. What about 100 people and they all answer an identical answer? So for any speaker of a language to have an identical answer is unusual because we're individuals. So in this case, if I allow students to use the word first for their transition word for detail 1, every student uses first because it's simple and it's easy. So please don't use it. I'm going to give you some options here. So to start is a great detail 1 transition word. For example is another one, and to begin with. So the idea is that we're using these as markers, as stop signs, as pointers to show we are going to talk about detail 1 now. So this makes it very, very clear what your thinking is and where you're going to be talking about your first detail. I'd also like to point out that immediately after these words is a comma. So when you're writing, when you're going to start your detail 1, you write to start, comma, and then you start to talk about your detail 1. Or you can use the for example, comma, and then you begin to talk about detail 1. Or, in the final case, you can use to begin with, comma. Don't forget the comma, please, because this is an important part of showing that it's your detail transition word, and it's another marker. I moved on to detail 2 transition words. So in this case, I've given you, again, rather than second, because I know second is really easy, but when you have 100 students out of 150 using the exact same words, it's boring, it's repetitive, and it's unusual. So be creative. Use some new transition words. So I've given you 4 choices here. Also, comma, in addition, comma, next, comma, moreover, comma. So again, in this case, we're still focusing on the details. It's really good for you to use these words. I also suggest that you use these, if you're using, if you're giving presentations in a language, these are effective ways for you also to remember what you're going to talk about next. Moving on now, of course, to detail 3 is slide 23 that I'm on right now. So for detail 3, I prefer for you to use, rather than third, you can use last, comma. So you're going to, this shows you're going to give your last point, basically. Lastly, which is, this is going to be my final point. Finally, comma, last but not least, comma. So you can choose what you'd like to, but I recommend highly that you use detail words for detail 1, detail 2, and detail 3. Now moving on to slide 24 to finish it. Now, you don't have to use these, but these are also really good ways for you to show that your reader, that you're coming to the end of the paragraph. And it also helps you as a writer to remember, oh yeah, I have to go back to the beginning, because I noticed that, as I said before, that a lot of students don't restate what they talked about. So for example, when you were talking about a person that you admired, I would say that most students used he or she. They used a pronoun instead of the name. But remember, you should go back to the name of the person, or perhaps their relationship to you as well, to remind the reader who it was you were talking about. So to finish it off, you can choose in conclusion. So this is for our conclusion. To summarize, which is, to recap, you're going to put everything back together again. So this is moving back again to your introduction and what you were talking about. Or you can choose, as you can see, comma, and then restate your general topic and why you were talking about it. Now, there are a couple points that I'd also like to add here, because although they're cute and lovely, they're really emoticons and, cute eyes. These are more for text messages than for formal academic writing. So it shows that it is cute, and I understand why you're doing it, don't get me wrong, but it shows that you're treating it in a casual way. So if you go into an interview, do you want the interviewers to think of you being a casual person or a serious person if they're hiring you to be an elementary school teacher? And I'm hoping that you think they're going to say they want you to be serious, because they want good teachers. So the third point I want to talk about is the end. The end is usually used in movies. So when you come to the end of the movie, it puts a sign up saying the end, and everyone's happy, everybody stands up and leaves the cinema. For a